Most of mental health lobbying is we want what they have. We, being the underfinanced public mental health system, want what they, our primary care brothers and sisters, have.
We're angry because we have so many fights that we must pursue in order to give our community the dignity, the respect that they deserve to be well and to be loved.
Those are the voices of Gordon Lavigne, CEO of the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance, and Al Guida, advocate for mental health public policy, both in the fight to create a movement for systemic change to improve care and support and equity for those with schizophrenia and psychosis, and to fight for a cure. Welcome to our podcast, Schizophrenia, Three Moms in the Trenches. From the place where schizophrenia and real life collide. East Coast, West Coast, Middle America. With Miriam Feldman, Mindy Greiling, and Randy Kay. Finally, a place to talk about the truth. Welcome to episode 76. Tonight, we're going to have an episode that Mindy and Mimi and I have been talking about doing for a long, long time, talking about schizophrenia as a treatable brain disease. And we've got just the guests to tell us all about it. This is Taking Action with the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance. Mindy Greiling is on the board, and we're bringing in a second, Gordon Lavigne, who is the CEO, and Alfonso Guido Jr. Did I say his name right? Well, ask him when he comes on, because I make mistakes like anybody else.
At the end there instead of an O. I think you said Guido, but there's
Guido. All right. Well, I will correct that later. Anyway, before we bring them on, Mindy, last time we did a podcast, your Jim had a bit of a relapse. Is he doing better?
Thank you for asking. I'm so glad that he is doing better. You know, I think he just absentmindedly took too much medication, but then when he wasn't feeling well, he added some more things onto that, and then he had seizures. But luckily, we worked with his doctor, who you know is Dr. Robert Laitman, also on the board of Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance. And he's all perfect now, as perfect as he's going to get. I met with, Jim and I meet with Dr. Laitman together, and we did it yesterday afternoon. We had his blood levels. Everything is tip top again. And Jim is blowing out his birthday candles just a few minutes ago. Aww. His birthday was yesterday. My husband Roger's is tomorrow. So we're so happy that we're back in gear for the birthdays and for life.
That's wonderful. And as all our listeners know, it's a roller coaster. There's many games, none of them are fun, but it's good that sometimes what goes around comes around, and we consider ourselves lucky when it does. So I'm really glad. Mimi, by the way, is traveling again. She was hoping her plane would take off late so she could join us from the airport, but it was on time. So we have two moms in the trenches, and we're going to bring on Gordon and Al in a moment. As my listeners know, what we're going through here is this pre-trial period in minimum security jail for my son, my first time being the mother of an inmate. And it's been interesting because he sounds more like himself right now than he has in a long time. And I think it's because he's making friends. I think being with 55 other people, and like he says, well, I'm doing pretty well considering I'm in jail, but he's also, my son is so sweet. And he's like, oh, it's my friend's birthday and we're going to make ramen noodles for a surprise birthday party for him. So I've been in the process of collecting letters, character reference letters about my son, who I call Ben for publicity purposes. And that has been so heartwarming and also so heartbreaking for me to get all these letters of support from all these people who love him, customers that he used to wait on at the restaurant where he worked, the management of the restaurant, the manager of another place where he worked. And it's so heartwarming to see how many people care. I was able to collect 11 letters and friends of mine. And, I just hope it affects it. I hope it gets the public defender and the judge to see a clearer picture of who he is, and that we get him some help instead of a sentence. So that's where we are, because
That's wonderful that people came through for him. And, doesn't that say something, though, about our mental health system, that he's making friends and has a community in jail?
Yeah.
Maybe if he'd had that on the outside, he wouldn't be there.
Yes. And maybe if he had accepted it. Because what's interesting, there's something called choice fatigue, when you have too many choices and you just can't make choices. And, we'll be talking, actually, Alan, Gordon and I were talking about, people's rights, and we talk about that a lot. But sometimes I feel like my son does better when he doesn't have that many choices. And right now where he is, he's told when to eat. He's told who he's going to live with. He can pick and choose his friends from among them. He's told when it's playtime. And I actually feel like not being able to say no actually puts him in a position to make the most of the situation. That's just my armchair psychology. But anyway, so we're okay. He's safe. I'm going to see him on Saturday. Took a while to get a visit, and that's where we are. So thank you. And Mimi will tell us next time she comes up. So let's talk about, now, is there a shorter way to say Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance?
S&PAA.
All right. So S&PAA has a vision. And that vision is to see schizophrenia and psychosis spectrum disorders universally recognized and treated as neurobiological brain illnesses. And the mission is to create a movement for systemic change in order to, yes, please, improve care, support, and equity for the millions of people living with schizophrenia and psychosis spectrum disorders. So that's
I'm going to say, when we get Gordon on here, maybe the first thing we can ask him is, we just had our annual meeting last weekend in Texas, and we changed both of those things that you just read, the vision and the mission. So I think they're even better. So Gordon can tell us what they are when he gets here.
Let's bring on, turn on, please enter and turn on your cameras, please. Al and Gordon. Al, please say your name correctly for me so I don't.
Randy, it's Al Guida.
Guida. So
yes, ma'am.
Guido, because I wrote it wrong. Guida. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. I wasn't that far off, so I'll just keep my mistake in there because I'm a human being. All right. So, why don't we just start off by telling us the new mission?
Sure. And thank you for having us. And certainly we are grateful for all of the advocacy and awareness that all of you have been doing for all of these previous podcast episodes. We look forward to this conversation. So the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance has been around since about 2008. We actually go a step farther back if you trace our history even to 1985 in Michigan with the Schizophrenic Anonymous organization, which was a peer-based support group, which morphed into the Schizophrenia and Related Disorders Alliance of America, which then about 2 years ago in March of 2001 changed into S&PAA, or Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance. What cuts across all of that time horizon is our unwavering commitment to support those living with schizophrenia and psychosis. And obviously over that time span, we have learned a thing or two about how our messaging is resonating, where the science is going. And as Mindy suggested, we actually refocused and modified our vision and mission slightly, not abandoning anything that you read. All of those things are still very much true. But we wanted to highlight some additional aspirational goals and some very specific areas where we think we can have short-term impact. But the long-term vision is to cure schizophrenia. Without that, none of this really matters, right? But in the meantime, a cure is not going to happen today or tomorrow. It's going to take some time. And the medical and scientific experts would tell you, in order to, quote, have the definition fulfilled as a cure, you need to have both disease-modifying therapeutics, plus you need to have preventative measures. We don't fully have either, but we believe that the science is becoming strong enough that it's not out of the ballpark to aim for those things. Initiatives like a biomarker initiative that our organization is a steering committee member at the NIMH to find biomarkers for schizophrenia.
And in case everybody doesn't know, National Institute of Mental Health is NIMH.
Exactly. So we think the science is there to say very confidently that cure is possible with more investment in science and research, of course. But until there's a cure, there is recovery. And our mission is to try to remove all of the systems level barriers that exist, which are plentiful. They're in every direction for those living with schizophrenia and psychosis. But we also know that there is proven techniques, therapeutics, social support systems, et cetera, that can enhance and support people for meaningful recovery. And those are the things that we're going to be pursuing. And all of the wraparound education, research, care and support and advocacy and policy that is required to be successful with all of those things.
Wow, and we did have a little bit of disagreement, not a lot, but about when we changed our vision to curing schizophrenia. Some people were like, can you actually cure it? But we came around to an almost unanimous decision. And that was because there are so many people that think it isn't even treatable. So if you have this huge vision, even if it's 5 years away or 40 years away, as someone said, it's really, it gets people to thinking we really should accelerate. We should do something. It's just a really, I think, markedly different and so much more proactive and positive of a vision. I love it. And when I first saw it, I had to pause too, because I thought, I don't know if Jim is ever going to be cured. But listening to the people there that have more research knowledge than I do, I came around, and I really, I think we are doing really good work at this organization.
Can I just say, in a way, I feel like I'm interviewing the three of you now. Like I'm but what I'm feeling as the mother of someone with severe schizophrenia, and Mindy and I were talking before about character letters I'm collecting for my son. I'm sure you guys heard it because you were listening. These were not letters from before he was ill. Some of these people have known him before his illness took hold, but these were letters when he was successfully being treated with a medication that worked the best for him. He spent 9 years. These are letters of how well he was functioning, even with schizophrenia, with proper treatment. As Mindy and I were saying, 65% of who we could have been, I'll take it for now. But to hear the word cure just brings tears to my eyes. Yeah. When you say 4 or 5 years, I'm like, bring it on. That is nothing, to aim for that. That is just so exciting for me to hear your mission as it was and your mission as it is. Now, Al, you've got more than 3 decades of experience in health, public policy, and government relations, and you're both in our nation's capital. You're a top strategic thinker. And you're adept at advancing legislation and public policy. So what is, I think I can guess, but what is your role with S&PAA? And
so, Randy, I've helped to represent S&PAA on Capitol Hill, as Gordon has indicated, for about 5 years now. And so one of the debates on Capitol Hill now has a direct relationship to your son's current situation. There's an active debate on the Finance Committee, which governs Medicaid, about Medicaid coverage for inmates in state prisons and county jails. Now, that doesn't sound like a mental health or addiction treatment specific policy, but it is, because there's such a high incidence rate for mental illness and substance use disorder among individuals that are in custody, or that are in our nation's penal systems. And I'm sure you've discussed this in previous editions of your podcast, but essentially we've reinstitutionalized what was a population that was served in state hospitals in our nation's penal system. So I think the Cook County jail system and the Los Angeles County jail system and the New York City jail system trade places seemingly in terms of operating the largest inpatient psychiatric hospitals in the United States. So I got you. I mean, as a matter of fact, I was raised by a man with schizophrenia. My father had schizophrenia. That's why I'm in this business. That's why I've dedicated most of my professional life to advancing public policy in the mental health and addiction treatment space. So I've got some understanding of what you've been through trying to raise this young man. And I'm sorry that he finds himself in the circumstances that he's now in. And unfortunately, he's living the life that many, many people with schizophrenia live, which is behind bars or in some kind of an institutional setting. And I'm sorry about that. I really am.
Thank you. And we're hoping that, because this is all pre-trial, it's pre-trial. So they are working really hard to get him into a jail diversion where he'll get substance abuse and mental health help. That's an interesting process that I'm learning. And we did, for our listeners, we did interview Elisa Roth, a New York Times journalist who wrote the book, Insane: America's Criminal Treatment of the Mentally Ill. So if you're interested in learning more about that specifically, that's a couple of episodes back. So, Mindy, I'm going to ask you, grab a question and ask it in light of what you would most like all our listeners to know about S&PAA and where it's going. Where's the hope?
Well, I would most like listeners to know that that it's an organization on the rise. There's ebbs and flows of nonprofit organizations that people start with a lot of passion. And Gordon kind of went through our history, and I've only been on the board a couple of years, but it's gone through a lot of iterations. But I feel like with this retreat that we had, our annual meeting in Texas this past weekend, that we have arrived where we're on the cusp of doing the most important work that we've ever done. We've been kind of a research organization. And, as you know, I'm a former legislator. And when people come forward to policymakers with research, I always think that's really good. But I always ask them then, how do you want to apply that? What do you want us policymakers to do? And that's where I think we're just arriving. So I know Gordon can talk more about that. But before we get to that juncture, I just want to bring in the event that we had last spring that I think was kind of a catalyst for us to get more into advocacy. And that was the Angry Moms event on Capitol Hill. I was back here in Minnesota at the NAMI National Convention, and I had a chance to sell books there. So I'd already been signed up for that before this one got scheduled, but I hope to be there next year. And maybe Gordon and Al can talk about that, and then also talk about some of our plans for another one coming up this year.
Gordon.
So we exist because we are trying to shine a light on the realities of those living with schizophrenia and psychosis. We also know that in order to be effective, we have to translate real-world experience into fact-based arguments. So a lot of our research, we don't do biomedical research. However, we do support biomedical research approaches, things that like the National Institutes of Mental Health, AMPS, Accelerating Medicine Partnership for Schizophrenia, and the Biomarkers Project. But in-house, the types of research that we pursue, total cost of schizophrenia in the United States study that we did about 2 years ago, which basically talked about the total economic impact of schizophrenia of $280 billion to the United States across all domains of daily living, is meant to give flight and focus to advocacy. Because what we know is the existing policies and laws nationwide are dramatically inadequate to supporting this population. So our intention is absolutely, we have two words in our name that I want to highlight. action, and alliance. We want to do stuff with people. And we absolutely do not want to go solo. There's this whole thing in the nonprofit world about working together. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? We think it's an essential thing. And we can't do this alone. But we also realize that there are places that we can focus that perhaps larger organizations, either for whatever reason, aren't able to take the lead. They can be a secondary or a third in line, all under the same umbrella, working together. In other cases, we're not the lead. We're number 3 on that list, but we're all rowing in that same direction together because we can't do everything alone. But what we want to do is shine a light. We want to be nimble. We want to be fast. And we want to be honest about the overall systems level problems and barriers that exist. So this event last May, so it happened to be World Schizophrenia Day during Mental Health Awareness Month, which is May. It'll happen again next May. But we as an organization had never done a focused, we had an event in on Capitol Hill before, but actually flying a lot of advocates in to go visit their local elected officials and to really press forward with key legislative priorities is something that is essential. And we look forward to doing that again in the future.
And it's too bad Mimi isn't here because we did have Sue Maida on for a program who started the Angry Moms, and Mimi Feldman was actually in Washington at that event. The picture that S&PAA has on the website of the moms who were there, Mimi's front and center with her big smile. So that was just a cool organization. And I don't think it would have happened with just the Angry Moms. It took the S&PAA being nimble and working with Al, who has the smarts to connect everybody and make all those office visits on Capitol Hill. And it also took a lot of fundraising from S&PAA to make that happen. You can't just get into those rooms and without all that planning. So Al, do you want to add anything to that about the events?
I would. So Randy, it was a dynamic partnership between S&PAA and the Angry Moms, and so what I would say is it was dynamic. So it was sort of good news and bad news, right? So the good news is it was a terrific show of advocacy, and I think it had an impact. It generated a Dear Colleague letter on Capitol Hill directed at the Food and Drug Administration regarding attempting to improve access to a 40-year-old generic antipsychotic medication. Okay, so therein,
you can say what it is.
Therein lies the challenge. It's clozapine,
right?
And so therein lies the challenge, right? So the fact that the one of the best medications on the market to treat persons with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder is a 40-year-old generic medication is an indication that our pharmaceutical, that we haven't advanced in the armamentarium necessary to properly address the day-to-day clinical needs of these individuals. But having said that, it was a wonderful show of advocacy, and it produced a result which forced the FDA to respond. As a matter of fact, then Gordon and I were on Capitol Hill today on the Senate side, trying to approach the Senate Mental Health Caucus regarding the exact same issue with a follow-up letter to the FDA on the exact same, on a follow-up piece of advocacy in an effort to force the agency's hand to produce more access to this vital medication, which the agency, in a misguided way, as far as we're concerned, is narrowing access to this life-saving drug.
So the fight goes on to reduce or eliminate the REMS for clozapine. And we invite you to hear our episode with the Angry Moms. But Angry Moms is History is full of angry moms, and we can't do it alone. We need partnership, like you say, working together. So I'm curious about two things. One, Al, you have shared that you grew up with a father who had schizophrenia, so that maybe fueled your passion for this. Gordon, I'd like to know if you have a similar story that fueled your interest. And then I keep going back to hope. Like, when you say we're looking for a cure, can you say more? I know you're not a biomedical company, but you are working. Can you tell us where the hope is? Like, where, just give us an idea of what sort of research could lead to treatments that are different from what we have now. I mean, I heard at a NAMI conference that the schizophrenia treatment or mental illness treatment is where like cancer treatment was 50 years ago. It was like chemo or nothing. And what will get us past that? So Gordon, if you would just share if you have a personal story first, and then can we talk about cures?
Sure. So like every family in the United States, my family has been touched by severe mental illness, severe depression, OCD, bouts of psychosis. So it's very personal and very real. I also have experience professionally with different conditions: Alzheimer's, autism, ALS. So I have a lot of nonprofit insights into how other patient advocacy organizations have built the cause to be as effective as possible. In terms of hope, so our organization led a broad coalition. We did it with NAMI, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, National Council for Mental Wellbeing, Mental Health America. We were the lead organization to organize what the FDA calls the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative, which has been around for about 15 years. And in many different conditions, there is a focused, dedicated day where the real world evidence of that particular condition is brought to light in a panel presentation, a pre-meeting survey. Our shorthand PFDD, Patient Focused Drug Development meeting, occurred 1 year ago, almost to the day, next week. And it was the first time that schizophrenia had ever been highlighted in this way. There were 63 staff from the FDA there, and in a year of preparation for this meeting, took that long to do. What we discovered was, through some pretty detailed analysis, if you look at central nervous system conditions, and you look at the number of clinical trials that are in place for the different, conditions that fall under that CNS umbrella, schizophrenia was number 2, right? Alzheimer's is very high, a lot of action going on. Schizophrenia was number 2. About 60 ongoing clinical trials. Now we started looking into that, like, how does that compare? And some of our advisors said it's robust. Now, thank God it's robust, because there hasn't been anything novel, innovative, disease modifying. We've got these 40-year-old, 30-year-old, 20-year-old antipsychotic medications with a really lousy side effect profile. We desperately need new therapeutics. And what we were able to amplify is what matters most to patients. Do you really want to gain 100 pounds and not be able to easily get to work, not be able to cook dinner, not to be able to go on a date, drive your own car? No, that's not a meaningful, thriving lifestyle. So we were able to highlight what matters most to our community and to advocate. And I'll tell you, without saying which is going to actually be approved, no one knows. But there's an existing late stage review for CAR-XT, which is actually going to be focused on an entirely different brain receptor, which is differentiated. So the fact that, without saying whether one is better than the other, we don't know.
Right.
But what matters is there's innovation going on in the pipeline. That there's over 50 clinical trials. Like, if that doesn't give you hope for better stuff, I'm not sure what does. But we also know that we haven't fully optimized what is already in the toolkit, so to speak. That's why we're so focused on removing barriers related to things like clozapine. And there are other issues with other medications where you can't find a prescriber. The prescribers haven't been fully, trained on some of the realities of what works best for people living with schizophrenia. And then you got the whole reimbursement and payer landscape, which adds additional complications to it. So there's just education all around that has to take place.
So one thing I know I'm on this board, but I would like to hear the history. You went through all the different, like I said, ideations of this group. With passion, mental health groups spring up here and there, and then some consolidate, some fade away. And you said, I liked what you said, Gordon, about Action Alliance. We're about taking action, and we don't always have to be the lead. Obviously, NAMI is the big organization, the big gorilla in the pool. And I was on that board 20 years ago. And then we did focus on serious and persistent mental illnesses. But over time, that group has gotten to be, they kind of bragged about, at one time, I heard somebody bragging about, we're all things to all people with mental illnesses. And so I see this group focusing on schizophrenia and psychosis related disorders as really important, because there's just not as much focus, I don't think, on people with schizophrenia. And I think that's the viewpoint of a lot of our listeners. But could you talk about how we do work with NAMI? Because alliances are important. And are there other organizations that S&PAA works with, and how do we do that?
Sure. So our approach is we've got a handout to anyone who will accept our hand. In the last several years, NAMI and our organization so we are both steering committee members on the Accelerating Medicine Partnership for Schizophrenia project. That's a 5-year initiative. We're going into year 4 together. We also have a handoff relationship. When you call the NAMI helpline and someone says, I've got symptoms, my son has symptoms of schizophrenia, I'm concerned. We are their referral partner to our helpline for trying to provide additional support. We also work on policy-related issues together. So there's a lot of collaborative intentions. However, we also know that because they're very broad, right, they can't be all things to all people, and certainly there are roles and activities that make more sense for us to lead under our banner, which we're proud to do. But we also know that the scale and the sheer size of an organization like NAMI is very useful to leverage, and there's a willingness at the most senior levels of both organizations to do that.
That's fantastic.
And Mindy, if I can, on this clozapine issue, so in addition to the angry moms, Gordon created a relationship with the American Association of Psychiatric Pharmacists and the AAPP. As a matter of fact, we teamed with them on the briefing, and Dr. Deanna Kelly from the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy was on the Hill with us today. So Gordon's very good at creating these relationships both in and outside the mental health community to advance your agenda.
Wow. I mean,
fantastic. You were mentioning a little bit, Al, but in case our listeners missed it, I think it's just this week that the U.S. Senate started a bipartisan mental health caucus with 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And so I'm really proud that one of those senators is Senator Tina Smith from my state of Minnesota. And so I know that I've called and we're going to be talking with her, I think, on a Zoom meeting perhaps soon.
Good.
So I consider that like so wonderful to get to talk to my senator with this wonderful S&PAA that I serve on the board for. But could you give us a peek at how it went with your meeting with one of the other chairs? I think the one from California. How did that go today?
It went well. And Mindy, if I could say, so look, I've got gray hair here, as you can probably see, and I've been a mental health lobbyist, for better or worse, for the best part of 30 years. And so there's a through line throughout those 30 years. Members of Congress that are willing to lift water on behalf of mental health and mental illness have a family member with an Access 1 severe mental illness, an immediate family member. That goes back to Senator Pete Domenici from New Mexico, and Senator Paul Wellstone from Minnesota back in the 90s, all the way through Senator Gordon Smith from Oregon, had a son that completed suicide, through Lynn Smith from Michigan, Congresswoman from Michigan, to today. So Senator Padilla, the senator we met, the Democratic co-chair of the Senate Mental Health Caucus, his mother-in-law has a combination of bipolar disorder and schizoaffective disorder. An S&PAA board member that lives in California saw a San Francisco Chronicle article, and the article that discussed the senator's personal history, discussed their first date that the senator had with now Mrs. Padilla, where she discussed her mother's battle with schizophrenia, with schizoaffective disorder and bipolar disorder. And the article seemed to suggest that the mother-in-law is on clozapine. And we brought that up today in the meeting. So it went pretty well, all things considered.
That's wonderful. Talk about nimble and serendipitous.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. And then, the Republican co-chair is Senator Tillis from North Carolina. So Senator Tillis had a medical surgical condition. He was being treated with steroids. It was a steroidal treatment. And then the steroid treatment triggered mania. So it triggered mania. So, and then, apparently then it basically it mimicked bipolar disorder. He both had mania and then major clinical depression for a period of 2 years, as I understand it. And so that's why he co-chairs the Senate Mental Health Caucus. So these are new members that have stepped out. And by the way, Randy, Mindy, these acknowledgments would have ended political careers when I began this 30 years ago.
Some of us of my age, and maybe yours, Thomas Eagleton, we all remember what happened to him. He had to drop out running for national office because of just depression, and that he had seen a therapist. That, not to mention if someone, I don't even know if it was a long-term mental illness, but that just knocked him out.
So let me say two final things.
So it makes me feel very good to hear bipartisan and a committee filled with people to whom this situation is humanized. We can all agree there are some crazy things happening in Washington right now. And part of that is that the truth isn't there. They're just seeing opinions. They're seeing opinions on social media. But when mental illness comes home to you, to your family, it humanizes it. Yeah. And now you have to go, wait a minute, this is a real problem. Let's talk about facts. And that makes me feel very glad to know that you were there, that there are lawmakers there that care. Hold on a second. So I would like to ask you, if we have listeners who are going, how do I get involved? What can I do? How can I help S&PAA? Can they join as a member? Can they engage? How can our listeners who want to join this fight, what opportunities are there for people to get involved?
There's a couple of different ways to get involved. First and foremost is we want to be here to help, right? So if you or anyone who you have in your family, your friendship circle, that is looking for any type of support, education, information for schizophrenia and psychosis, we're here. We're not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but during normal business hours, we even check on weekends. Reach out to us. We have support groups for those who are either diagnosed themselves or their care partners. And we have a lot of resources we'd like to provide. That's number one. Number two, we're a nonprofit organization, and like all of them, none of us exist without the support of the public and those who believe in our mission through financial donations. That's essential. The third thing is we do want to create a movement for change. And someone mentioned the angry moms and you in the trenches, and to carry forward the analogy, I'm an angry CEO. Al's an angry government relations specialist. We're angry because we have so many fights that we must pursue in order to give our community the dignity, the respect that they deserve to be well and to be loved. So we have a ton of work that needs to be done, and we need all the help that we can get.
That's amazing. I think the last question would be, what haven't we asked you that you would like us to know, and how can people get in touch with you?
I think that the question, if I were sitting in your seat, would be, how long is it going to take? You talk a good game. You got this cool vision. It's aspirational. It's the moonshot, but you're more practical because you're pursuing recovery in all of its forms, whatever that means. But how long? Look, you guys know very well. There's not a second that goes by where you're not thinking about the impact. Is your son or daughter okay? Mm-hmm. When will I hear from them again? And that's a very stressful experience. So when is all of this so-called change going to happen? And while Al and I can't sit here and give you an exact day and time and year, there's a lot to be paying attention to. The fact that we can walk through the corridors of Congress and have elected officials. Senator Fetterman's another great example of someone who has actually been hospitalized and can come back to the halls of Congress in a bipartisan way and talk about that experience. And we're talking about schizophrenia and what has traditionally been the scarier forms of mental illness, to the fact that people are actually listening and not running for the hills gives us hope. You're going to see progress from the clinical trial perspective. Like I said, one of the medications is going to have the final readout of phase 3 in a couple months. You have a whole host of other phase 3 and phase 2 new therapeutics that are right behind it. You have all of this action going on Capitol Hill. And we know if you look at bipolar and eating disorders and depression and anxiety, broadly speaking, the fact that you have Hollywood and just part of our normal course of action these days, people freely talking about these traditionally taboo topics, you're going to see that come toward our side of the fence pretty soon as well. So I've never felt in the history of our organization more hopeful than what we're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years. And that's still too slow, but I think things are quickening. The pace is moving faster.
I love that. Thank you, Al. Anything you want to add? And maybe you can also add like the name of your website and all that as well.
Oh, we're at guideconsultingservices.com and, or pardon me, guidelobby.com. So Randy, I would also concur with Gordon. And look, what I would say is, again, I've been at this for a very, very long time, and public attitudes have changed for the better over those 3 decades, without a doubt. The public dialogue and discussion about mental health more broadly is absolutely extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Now, has it caught up to individuals with severe and persistent mental illnesses? No. There's much less stigma associated with clinical depression and anxiety than existed in the past. But I think we're making progress, and certainly discussions among public office holders, among celebrities, among chief executive officers about mental health issues. It's unprecedented in the time that I've been doing this work. So that leads me to some hope that we can generate the resources necessary to expand the public mental health system. Gordon has been talking about the scientific development. Most of my work is try to generate the Medicaid and related financing for a radically underfinanced system. Most of mental health lobbying is we want what they have. We, being the underfinanced public mental health system, want what they, our primary care brothers and sisters, have. That's 90% of what I do. And so I really do think that these changes in public attitudes and we really saw this demonstrated during COVID, is generating a sea change that helps with the advocacy in this space with respect to the resources that the system needs to be able to better support Randy, Mindy, your children,
and people like your father,
and the millions of people with schizophrenia that live in the United States.
Well, as I say, from your mouth to the legislators' ears, I think I played with that phrase a little bit. I know you're fighting. You're with us fighting the fight. I mean, truly living the alliance part and the action part for schizophrenia and psychosis. And I thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And so it's guidelobby.com and the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance. That's the same website, or is
it's a different website? It's sczAction.org.
sczAction.org. We'll put that in the show notes as well. And you've just heard it. And Mindy, any final words? I just want to thank you both so much for joining us and for your work.
I echo what Gordon said. I've never been so hopeful about schizophrenia in general, and Gordon about this S&PAA organization. I think just like our podcast, we're not afraid to say schizophrenia, 3 moms in the trenches. And we have, tons of listeners. We do nothing but grow and grow and grow. And we wouldn't have probably wanted to, hang our hats on that word 20 years ago. And now we have this organization, Schizophrenia and Psychosis Action Alliance. We're proud that that's what we're working toward, and that's who we're working toward. So that alone gives me hope. But all the action that's coming is incredible.
Wow, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're Schizophrenia, 3 moms in the trenches, and 2 men of action with organization behind them that gives us hope. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for joining us for this episode of Schizophrenia, 3 Moms in the Trenches with Randy Kay, Mindy Greiling, and Miriam Feldman. To get in touch with us or to learn more about our books, please visit our websites at miriam-feldman.com, mindygreiling.com, or randykay.com.